All right, ready to dive deep into some philosophy. Today, it's Pascal's wager, one of those thought experiments that just keeps sparking debate.
Yeah, Pascal's wager, huh? What always gets me is how it kind of sidesteps the whole prove God exists thing.
Right, it's not about certainty. It's more like, okay, what's the best move in this game, even if we don't know all the rules?
Exactly. Pascal's looking at it like a bet, a gamble with, well, cosmic stakes, right? And the way he brings in probability, it's like early decision theory in action.
Pretty ahead of his time, wasn't he? But to really get this, we need the context. Back then, everyone was obsessed with proving God.
Oh, yeah, they were all about those proofs, but Pascal wasn't convinced.
He thought there had to be a different approach.
Exactly. He shifted the focus. Instead of proof, he's like, what's the most prudent move for you? What's the best strategy? It's a prudential argument.
Okay, so less theology, more game theory. I like where this is going, but before we go all in, maybe a quick decision theory 101, just so we're all on the same page.
Sure, yeah, good idea. Think of it this way. You've got different outcomes, each with a certain value that's utility. And then you've got your choices, but sometimes you're not sure how things will play out. Pascal, even way back then, was doing something a lot like expected utility calculations.
So Pascal's wager, it's like this ancient prototype for modern decision theory. That's pretty wild, but let's get to the wager itself. What's the bet?
All right, picture a decision table. One side, God exists. Other side, nope, God doesn't exist. Your options, well, you can major for God or against him.
Classic setup, 2 by 2. But what about the payoffs in this cosmic casino? What are we talking about?
Here's where it gets interesting. Pascal says if you wager for God and, he's real, well, jackpot, eternal life, bliss, you name it, infinite reward. But if you wager for God and turns out nothing there, well, you're back where you started. No big loss, right?
Okay, so wagering for God, not looking too bad so far. But what if you go against him?
Now things get a little risky. If you wager against God and he is real, well, let's just say not ideal, maybe eternal, whatever the point is, bad bet. But if you wager against God and he doesn't exist, well, again, nothing changes, status quo.
So it seems like no matter what, wagering for God, it's the safer play. Is that what he's getting at?
You got it. And here's where the probability comes in. He's like, even if you're not sure, give some probability to God existing, even a tiny bit. As long as it's not zero, that potential infinite reward, it outweighs any finite cost.
Like he's using the concept of infinity to tilt the scales towards believing.
Yeah, he's saying look at the expected utility, you multiply the value of each outcome by its probability, and even a small chance of infinite reward, well, that ends up with an infinitely large expected utility.
But wait a minute. What if you're absolutely certain there is no God? Like a hardcore atheist, zero probability. Wouldn't that kind of blow the whole thing up?
That's a big objection, yeah. If you're a strict atheist, then the expected utility of believing versus not believing, it's the same. Pascal's wager, it wouldn't apply at all.
This is fascinating. This simple thought experiment, it keeps raising all these deep questions about rationality and belief. And I'm guessing there are a lot more objections to this whole wager.
Oh yeah, tons. And some of them get pretty complex.
All right, well, let's dive into those objections then and see if this wager can survive a little philosophical scrutiny. First off, what about that decision table itself? It seems a little oversimplified.
Right. Some people say, hold on, are those values, the utilities, really so black and white? Is salvation really infinitely good? Maybe depends on the person, right? And what about different ways of wagering for God? Maybe different approaches have different rewards.
Yeah, good point. We might need like more rows and columns in that table. And what about all the other gods? Can't you make the same argument for any deity?
Yes, the many gods objection, one of the classics. If you can't prove whether any god exists, then doesn't that apply to all of them? It's like our simple table just exploded into a giant spreadsheet.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. Is there even a decent counter to this infinite gods problem?
Well, some philosophers, they try using probability as a tiebreaker. Even if multiple gods offer infinite expected utility, maybe some are more likely than others.
That seems reasonable. But hold on, aren't we just shifting the problem? How do you figure out which god is more probable? It seems super subjective.
You're getting at a key issue there, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even touched on the deeper questions about how we assign probabilities in these kinds of scenarios, or if maximizing expected utility is always the rational thing to do. But I think we should probably save all that for part 2 of this deep dive.
Yeah, I think we've given our listener plenty to chew on for now.
Welcome back. I hope you've had some time to ponder those probability puzzles we left you with.
Oh, definitely. Last time we ended with that many gods objection, and I'm still kind of reeling from that one. But I think you were also hinting that there are even bigger issues with probability itself in Pascal's wager.
Right. Pascal's argument hinges on the idea that you can assign some probability to God existing, even a tiny one. But what if that's just not possible?
I think I'm starting to see the issue. It's one thing to argue about what that probability is, But what if we can't even apply the concept of probability to something like God?
Exactly. Some philosophers argue that trying to assign a probability to God's existence is irrational. It's like trying to weigh your thoughts. You're in the state of total ignorance, what we call epistemic nullity. Maybe the most rational response is just saying, I don't know and I can't assign a probability.
So maybe Pascal was a bit too quick to assume we could quantify the likelihood of God. But even if we set that aside, there are people who go even further, right?
You're talking about strict atheists. They don't just not know the probability. They flat out assign a probability of 0 to God existing.
Which, if we follow Pascal's logic, would completely shut down his argument. 0 times infinity. Well, you're still left with 0. No infinite reward can fix that.
Exactly. For a strict atheist, the expected utility of believing is the same as not believing. Pascal's wager wouldn't apply at all.
This is getting really interesting. This seemingly simple thought experiment keeps raising all these fundamental questions about rationality and belief. So we've got problems with the decision table, problems assigning probabilities. But wasn't there also something about the idea of maximizing expected utility itself being problematic?
You're right. Pascal assumes the most rational choice is always the one that maximizes expected utility. But there are challenges to that idea within decision theory itself.
Like those classic paradoxes, right? The St. Petersburg paradox comes to mind.
Exactly. That paradox shows a gamble with infinite expected value, but most people wouldn't risk much to play it. It seems counterintuitive that a rational person would bet everything they have, even with a chance at infinite winnings.
It's like our intuition pushes back against the pure math. Maybe there are other factors at play besides expected utility.
Probably. Things like risk aversion or the idea that money becomes less valuable the more you have. So maybe focusing solely on maximizing expected utility, like Pascal does, is too narrow, especially in these extreme situations.
This is starting to feel like we're on shaky ground here. And this leads to a trickier question. What about the different kinds of rationality?
That's a great point. We can talk about practical rationality, making choices to achieve our goals, and theoretical rationality, holding beliefs that are logically sound and based on evidence.
It seems like Pascal is appealing to practical rationality. He's saying, do what's in your best interest, even if it contradicts what you currently believe. But what happens when those two types of rationality clash?
That's a real dilemma, and Pascal actually acknowledges it. He even says you might have to renounce reason to wager for God. But many philosophers, and I'm sure our listener would agree, would say theoretical rationality should carry more weight, especially here.
It really makes you wonder if you can, or even should, try to force yourself to believe something just because it seems like the most advantageous option?
That's a valid concern, and it gets to the heart of what belief really is. But before we go too far down that road, we should talk about another major challenge, the problem of mixed strategies.
Right, mixed strategies. That's where we start flipping coins to decide if we believe in God, right?
Exactly. Remember how Pascal says wagering for God has infinite expected utility? Well, what if you don't wager outright, but flip a coin, heads you wager for God, tails you don't?
So, like hedging your bets, but on a cosmic scale.
Precisely. And if you calculate expected utility the standard way, this mixed strategy also has infinite expected utility. There's always that chance you'll flip heads and get that infinite reward.
Hold on, so flipping a coin is just as rational as full-blown belief in God. It seems like we found some loophole in the math.
It does, and it gets even wilder. Because you could use this logic for any action, really. Eating a sandwich, reading a book, even actively trying to avoid belief in God. If there's a tiny chance it might lead you to eventually wagering for God, then by this logic, it all has infinite expected utility.
So everything we do becomes some kind of cosmic coin flip. This whole mixed strategies thing seems to throw the idea of rational choice right out the window.
It definitely challenges Pascal's claim that wagering for God is the only rational choice. Philosophers have debated this for centuries, trying to figure out if Pascal's argument holds up and how to deal with decisions that involve potentially infinite values.
It seems like even if we give Pascal every benefit of the doubt, his conclusion that we should wager for God doesn't necessarily follow. This whole mixed strategies problem leaves us in a very uncertain place.
It does, and we haven't even touched on the ethical objections to Pascal's wager, which are a whole other issue, but I think we might be pushing the limits of our deep dive for now.
Yeah, this is definitely a lot to process, but we can't leave it there, right? We have to talk about those ethical concerns. I'm ready to dive into that. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dives on Pascal's wager. I hope you've had some time to mull over all those tricky questions from the last two parts, because things are about to get even more interesting.
That's right, we've dug into the logic, the probabilities, even the math of Pascal's wager, and, well, let's just say it's been a pretty wild ride so far.
Definitely. But now we've got to tackle the elephant in the room, the ethics of it all. Even if Pascal's logic holds up, is it actually morally okay to try and, force yourself to believe in God based on some cosmic reward system?
Yeah, it's a question that's been bothering philosophers for centuries. Some argue that wagering for God out of pure self-interest, well, it just feels wrong, like it corrupts the idea of faith.
I can see that. It's like you're trying to bribe God into giving you eternal life.
And Pascal, to his credit, he saw that potential for, well, self-deception. He says wagering for God might deaden your acuteness. Some think that means you're sacrificing intellectual integrity for a payoff.
Yeah, you're basically choosing convenience over truth. But aren't there also arguments that wagering for God could actually be harmful to society?
For sure. The philosopher W.K. Clifford, he made a pretty famous argument that believing anything without good evidence, it's dangerous. It spreads this kind of like disease of unreason, undermines the whole pursuit of truth.
Yikes, a disease of unreason. That's a scary thought. But then there's the whole problem of the divine plan itself. This idea that God would punish non-believers eternally, it seems really unfair to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a common criticism. If God is supposed to be all-loving and just, why would he punish people just for not believing? Especially if they never even had a chance to learn about him in the first place.
And if you accept this idea of a punishing God, then suddenly wagering for him feels, I don't know, kind of complicit. Like you're siding with a dictator out of fear, not genuine belief.
Those are all serious ethical challenges to Pascal's wager, for sure. It makes us think not just about whether our choices are rational, but also if they're morally right.
It's like, even if we manage to get through all the logical and probability hurdles, we're still stuck with this huge ethical dilemma. But wait a minute, isn't there another part to this whole wager that we haven't even mentioned yet?
Yes, Pascal's fourth wager. This is where he says wagering for God doesn't just get you stuff in the afterlife. It makes your life better right now.
So it's not just about avoiding eternal punishment. It's about living a better life today.
Right. Pascal argues that by wagering for God, you'll become more faithful, more humble, grateful, all those good things. You'll find a deeper kind of happiness, not just from fleeting pleasures, but from like connecting with something bigger than yourself.
So he's basically saying it's a win-win. Even if God doesn't exist, you still benefit from living a virtuous life.
That's the argument. He even says wagering for God leads to certain gains in this life, no element of risk. It's like a guaranteed recipe for a better life now and in the hereafter.
But is it really that straightforward? Can you just decide to be virtuous and suddenly everything's great? It feels almost too easy.
Yeah, it definitely raises the question of whether Pascal's picture of the virtuous life is, realistic. And then there's that deeper question, can you actually choose what you believe?
We've been dancing around that one this whole time. If belief is something that just happens to you, not something you can force, then what does it even mean to wager for God?
Well, this is where Pascal suggests taking steps to cultivate belief, even if you can't just make it appear out of thin air. He talks about things like acting as if you believe, doing religious practices, surrounding yourself with believers.
So it's not a one-time bet, but more like starting down a path that could lead to genuine belief.
That's it. It's an ongoing process, a wager that unfolds over time. The real decision is whether to start that journey or not.
That's a pretty powerful way to look at it. It's not just about gambling, it's about embarking on a journey of faith.
And I think that's why, even with all the logical issues and ethical debates, Pascal's wager is still so relevant. It speaks to this basic human desire for meaning, purpose, for something beyond the everyday.
It forces us to confront those really big questions. What do we believe? Why do we believe it? And what are we willing to bet our lives on?
Exactly. And ultimately, those are questions each of us has to answer for ourselves. There's no formula or easy solution. It's up to each individual to find their own way.
So for our listener, who I know loves a good philosophical challenge, the real value of Pascal's wager might not be in the answer itself, but in the journey it takes us on. It's a journey through logic, probability, ethics, and the very nature of belief.
Well said. It reminds us that even when we're faced with uncertainty, we still have the power to make choices, to take a chance, to shape our lives and our beliefs.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Pascal's wager. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep wagering on the things that truly matter to you.